And now from the Florida Today Information Center covering Central Florida's Space Coast. Today in Brevard, your source for community news and information.
Thanks for joining us in the Florida Today newsroom. I'm Matt Reed. My guest today may be the most important elected leader from Brevard who is still an unknown to many residents. State Senator Andy Gardner, a Republican from Orlando, represents the newly drawn District 13. It includes Port Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center in Titusville, as well as the University of Central Florida, the Lake Nona Medical City, and a piece of the Orlando International Airport. Gardner has built an impressive leadership resume in his 12 years in the legislature. First elected in 2000, he served as House Majority Leader from 2004 to 2006. He was Senate Majority Whip from 2008 to 2010, and served as Senate Majority Leader under President Mike Herodopoulos of Merritt Island from 2010 through this year. He's due to take over as Senate President in 2 years. I asked Gardner about his background in politics, of course, but also about school funding, the gun control debate, and health care reform. Take a look. Andy, talk about your leadership role in the Senate. You're going to be Senate President in 2014. What does that mean?
Well, the way it works is you go out and try to convince your colleagues in the Republican caucus to be the designate for a particular term, which is a 2-year term. So I've gone out and met with the members, and you actually have pledge cards, and you ask them to sign. And you know, thankfully, very humbly, we have the support of the Republican caucus to be our person in 2014. The Democrats will put somebody up as well, and depending on how the elections go, we'll have the opportunity, hopefully, to lead the Senate. And
you were Senate Majority Leader under Senator Mike Herodopoulos,
yes,
who was Senate President. How would you characterize that experience?
Well, it's actually my second round. I was Majority Leader in the Florida House under Speaker Bentz. And usually when you are Majority Leader once, you don't get asked again for various reasons. And for President Herodopoulos to ask me to be his Majority Leader, it was a great experience, and I learned a lot. And you know, President Herodopoulos just had such a good outlook on everything, really allowing the members to, as has been said, to put something out there. Maybe it passes, maybe it fails, but let members be members, and never lost his really approach to life that he still has. And so it was a great experience, learned a lot.
Now your district is pretty interesting. It includes Port Canaveral, Kennedy Space Center, I think it stretches over to UCF and down to Lake Nona and all that whole medical center stuff that's going on. Does it go to the airport as well?
It has I think we have one runway in the airport.
Okay.
But yeah, you know, we did redistricting this year, so all the districts changed. And of course, because of Amendments 5 and 6 that were passed by the voters, it changed the standards a little bit. And the district that ultimately was decided is an Orange County to Brevard seat, which is historically has been done in the past. Steve Crisafulli has been a member of the Orange County delegation in the past, as well as Brevard. But we think it's a great district. It's been very humbling. I've learned a lot, really relying on the members of the delegation to bring me up to speed.
How does that mix of institutions and activities affect your priorities as a senator in Tallahassee?
Well, these 2 years, President Gates has asked me to serve as chairman of the Transportation and Appropriations Committee, Economic Development. All the economic development issues will come through our committee. And I think when you look at the district, as you said, you have the port, you have NASA, you have Medical City, you have part of GOA. It really is about jobs, and we are in a good position working with the other members of the delegation to really focus on that going forward.
The big issue in Brevard County right now that might affect or involve the legislature is school funding. We're closing schools, probably laying off teachers, cutting back on some programs, busing, that kind of thing. Is there anything that the legislature can do to help on that front, or should do?
Well, we should, and I think what you've seen is, you know, for the last 4 or 5 years, except for last year, there has been a slight reduction each year because of the economy. We were reducing everywhere, universities, every aspect, because we have to have a balanced budget, and it was important. We had no option. Last year we put $1 billion additional into education. The governor has said he wants to put more money into education. I think you'll see the Senate and the House go along with that. That will help with some of the issues. I know that there will be those that say, well, the legislature should stop the closing. We don't want to see any closing of schools, But ultimately, that is a decision of the school board. Our job is to increase funding and then let the school board make the right decision for what's the right thing to do.
It sounds like a big concern among the school board is that we took some recessionary steps, cut some rates, asked for some transfers from capital, said go ahead and ask your voters for some temporary tax levies, and then when that expired and some of those measures weren't rolled back, it left them with holes that they had to fill, and that has led to. So do you think that the legislature might look at some of the things it did during the recession and start thinking, well, how do we get back to a more stable funding stream?
Yeah, and I think especially when it comes to school construction, because that was one thing that we heard is when we had the downturn of the economy, there wasn't the need to build the schools as rapidly, so you did provide that flexibility. I think you will see the legislature be very open to continuing that dialogue to see if there is a better option how to do the funding. Education funding from the state standpoint is one of the most, to be honest, confusing processes because it's a formula based on the theory is we are funding Johnny to go to a particular school, but there's the weighted funding, there's all these different things, and I know I've talked to Bill Galvano, who's going to be chairing our Education Appropriations Committee, to really look at the formula as a whole. I think the school districts, if they had their way, it would be almost like a block grant, pretty much what the state does to the federal government, says on Medicaid and other funding, just give us the money and let us come up with the own structure. I think you could see a similar dialogue on that, but anytime you try to go after those things, there's always something that you didn't anticipate.
There's always history built into those formulas.
There is.
Civil rights issues, efforts to make things more equal, and the like. I know that's difficult. The one thing that surprised me in Brevard was that one of the ways they're looking to save money is by disregarding the class size amendment. And they calculated that it would actually cost them less to go to a school-wide average and not comply with it and just pay the penalty than to comply with it. What do you make of that?
Well, deciding to pay a penalty, to me, would be essentially admitting that you're not complying with the constitutional amendment. To me, I would much rather see them come to the legislature because ultimately we are the ones, when the class size amendment passed, we did the implementing language and we went back and forth a lot on average for the school district, for schools, for class. I mean, there were a lot. I think a better dialogue would be for them to come to us and say, can we have some more flexibility in the class size amendment? Because I think we would be very open to helping that.
Let's talk a little bit about another issue that's been on a national level, and that was the shooting that happened up in Connecticut. And now you've got people saying, let's talk about guns. Let's talk about gun control, or no, let's not. Let's talk about having more guns and arming teachers.
Right.
The conversation's all over the place. Do you get the sense that there may be some kind of action in Tallahassee this coming year? Well,
on a couple fronts. First, I think everybody, to me, the nation is still in a state of mourning. And I'm always a little bit suspect when people are immediately coming out and saying we need to do X or we need to do Y. Thankfully, we have not had a situation like that here in Florida. I think the immediate thing to do, and we've seen it at least in Orange County, there was a meeting on Tuesday where additional dollars were given to have police officers, resource officers in our schools. We had done it on high school and middle school already, but now they've increased it to the elementary. And I think what you will see is there will be legislation filed that deals with gun control. Personally, I think what we should put on the table is really looking at mental health issues, guidance counselors, because sadly I think what we will find is that this was a very troubled young man, and it doesn't matter what legislation you pass or what gun you try to ban, it is really more of a mental health issue, and were there situations that this could have been prevented through the mental health situations, and I think that's where the legislature can really, whether it's through funding or screening or whatever it may be, make sure that something like this never happens in Florida.
Is it starting a new program, or is it a matter of passing laws? What are you picturing?
Well, I think it's looking at existing programs, and guidance counselors. I know guidance counselors, we should look at the student to guidance counselor ratio at a school. Guidance counselors have probably gone outside of their scope per se. I think we ought to look at that. These are the individuals on the front line that are working with these students that will see a particular situation. But I'd go even one step further. It's a sad situation, and I know that the first reaction is always, let's pass a law. But I do think it's important that we have a debate and a discussion about how our children spend their time. You know, what are the movies that they are drawn to? What is Hollywood putting out there? What are the top videos that these children, because what concerns me, and you can't legislate this, is really just the devaluing of life and respect for life. And I think that's a national debate that we should have.
Healthcare reform, a big one. I know that the state of Florida is, since the Supreme Court ruling, is now in this position of deciding whether it wants to buy into the system. Where do things stand today, and what's your take?
Well, the deadline of December 14th came and went, and on December 14th, the state of Florida needed to let the administration in Washington know if we were going to set up the exchange or they set up the exchange. We have not indicated that the state is going to set up an exchange. That doesn't mean we're not going to talk about it. It's the law of the land. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled. It's really more of a timing issue for us. We don't go into session until March, so it's hard to commit us to something without the legislature actually debating the issue and passing it. You will see us have a dialogue. Both the Senate and the House have set up special committees just to look at the health care law and what we could potentially do. It's not just about the exchanges. There's the expansion of Medicaid, and the legislature and the governor and all of us will have to look and see if we do the expansion, the federal government, still tax dollars, it's still your tax dollars and mine, for 3 years will cover 100%, but then it slowly goes down to really what happens now. It's Medicaid, it's about a 55-45 split. So the taxpayers could be on the hook for a lot of money, but we'll debate all that. You know, we'll look at that and we'll see if there is a system that works within the confines of what we're able to do.
Is it mostly a question of cost, or are there still ideological concerns about, do we go along with a federal program? Or do we want to be more sovereign as a state, or those kinds of things?
I think it's a little bit of both. You know, when you look at the exchanges, one of the things I hear from my colleagues, from the other senators, is it is so heavily regulated by the federal government that it's a federal government program, so let them own it, let them run it. There's very little flexibility in the exchanges. I think in the expansion of Medicaid, there are a lot of members that would say, okay, we're interested in expanding Medicaid, but give us some flexibility. The reality is, Secretary Sebelius has said it's all or nothing. You have to go to 133% of the poverty level. There's no flexibility. And that puts us in a tough spot, because I do think when the mandate, healthcare mandate, comes in, you are going to see a donut hole. You're going to see individuals that are not eligible for the exchange and they're not eligible for Medicaid. And there are a lot of us that are interested, how can we help those individuals? But we sure would like flexibility from the federal government to do that. How
would you characterize Medicaid in Florida today? It seems like it's awfully expensive, but also really hard to qualify for. Am I on target with that, or?
Well, yes. But I think what you saw last year, what we were looking at, the cost for Medicaid has skyrocketed. And we need to get a handle on that. So what we did, and we're still waiting for the final approval from the federal government, is we said, let's take our Medicaid population, put them in a managed care program that can not just be a fee for service if the individual has a situation, but really looks at primary care, the general health, to try to get those costs down. There will always be that situation where somebody is not completely qualified, but that's where we'd like some flexibility probably on this potential expansion, because you do have some people that just need support.
And you don't want to provide a disincentive to the people who could provide private sector insurance.
Correct.
To just steer them into a government program.
Correct, correct. And I would just add to that, what you could see, you know, you have a lot of businesses, small businesses out there that have 15 employees. And there will be some that will probably shed that employee or two to get under the threshold. Well, that individual now potentially becomes eligible for any new Medicaid program. So it's not just existing people. You may set this all up and all of a sudden you have a flood of people coming in that you financially didn't anticipate.
Switching gears a little bit, the new Senate president for this coming session has made, one of his first actions was to call for some new ethics rules, conflicts of interest. What's your understanding of those?
Yeah, well, some of it we've already done. When we went up there for the first day, we did our Senate rules, and in there it deals with disclosure of potential conflict of interest. And I think he's shown tremendous leadership, because what it says is you have to disclose that conflict before you even vote. It used to be that you just had to disclose it after, but you could still vote. We're going to have some legislation. Senator Jack Latvala from the Tampa Bay area is working on a bill to address conflict disclosure. Some of the political committees, we will bring forward something that I think people will be very proud of. But President Gates has made it a priority, and the Senate's going to do their best to deliver on that.
Are there other reforms or changes that you would like to see happen?
Well, I think that for me, the bigger issue is probably more on the transparency side. I don't think, nor would you want to have a situation where you take anybody's ability to donate to the campaign of their choice. And I love newspapers, but the prices go up during campaign season for advertising, different things like that, and commercials go up, the prices go up. That's not going to change. But what would be helpful is the transparency. When you have a situation where people aren't aware of who's maybe doing a mail piece or who's behind something that is out there, I'd like to see that change.
I think it would be nice to know who's responsible for some dirty tricks that you see out there. With some of the mailers and who some of the funds are, Citizens for Responsible Citizens for Better Government or something, and they're running an ad that looks crazy. Tell me a little bit about your leadership style. You've had an opportunity to be the majority leader under in the House, under Alan Bentz, and then also in the Senate under Mike Herodopoulos. How do you get things done?
Well, for me, I'm a big believer in a servant leader. Somebody that really allows all members, Republicans and Democrats, to do what they, fight for what they believe in. And I think when you do that, that's a leadership style that I like. And the Senate president, to me, is to set some guidelines, but then allow members. Everybody's earned the right to be there. I may not agree with every member and their positions on some things, but they ought to have the opportunity to defend them. And if they win, then the Senate will pass it. And I think that's a leadership style that people want. It's not going to change my principles and values about life, but I should respect the others and let them do what they believe they need to do to get things done.
What's the toughest thing you ever had to do to get something passed? Move somebody's office to the broom closet?
No, those days are long gone. But I think generally when we take something to the floor, you have a pretty good idea where it's going. And the days of arm twisting, those, at least in the Senate, it just doesn't work. Probably the more difficult ones is when you just need that one more vote. And in the House, you have 120 members to choose from. In the Senate, you only have 40. And it's hard to get that last vote. And we've had some situations over the years where it's been a 20-20 split, or you lose by one vote. The good thing, though, in my opinion, is when the vote's over, the person probably just voted against you. You just went and had dinner with them, whether they're a Republican or a Democrat, and life goes on, and maybe you come back the next year and you fight, and maybe you win. That's happened a couple times, too. That's a great thing about our Constitution and state government. You'll always have another shot at it.
One thing I learned from Mike Herodopoulos is that the job of the majority leader can be a tough one. You're flying all over the state. You're raising a lot of money. So you've seen the landscape politically in a big, diverse state like Florida. There's a lot of talk right now about what does the Republican Party need to do to be updated or relevant or better on a national stage. What's your take? What do you think?
Well, I tend to believe that if you have a core set of values and principles, pro-life, not raising taxes, some of these different things, you need to stick with them. That's what you believe in. What you don't want to do is water yourself down to where you're nothing more than the other party light. And I think that's kind of the debate that we're having. You're seeing it in Washington. You're seeing some different things. You go back and you look at history, there's a cycle to everything. And there were those that believed Ronald Reagan was too conservative, that you had all these situations where the Republicans had gotten trounced, and Ronald Reagan came back with a vision, and it was a positive vision. And I think we need to do that. And I do think the Republican Party needs to work on their ground game. We anticipated a certain voter turnout model, and the party was wrong. We need to find out what that is. And so times are changing. When I first ran in 2000, the voter contact was going to knock on a door or calling a home phone. Most of your 30-something or younger don't even have a home phone. There's no landlines. It's the internet and different things, and it's time for the Republican Party, in my opinion, to update how they engage in the game.
You think that's it? Primarily, it's the electioneering as opposed to
I think it's the messaging.
positions.
Yeah, to me, I think it's much more of the messaging. I think we are going to have quite a discussion about immigration reform. You look back to George W. Bush when he was president. He floated the idea of immigration reform in some capacity. Jeb Bush has been a supporter of some types of reform.
Mel Martinez was the guy who carried the water on that for some time.
I think that's a healthy debate for everybody. I think it's a healthy debate for the Republican Party. As majority leader, I know even within our caucus you had different views, especially with our South Florida members. We have 3 Hispanic American Cubans that felt very strongly and passionate about it. Different from maybe my view, and it's trying to balance that difference of opinion, but also being a big enough tent as a party that you can have differing views. But at the end of the day, you have those core values that you just can't change.
What's your personal desires?
Just in general?
On immigration, for example.
Yeah, we came 2 years ago, we had legislation we passed out of the Senate that required E-Verify for individuals. I think that's a good step in the right direction. The reality was then, as it is now, I'm not sure we could even pass E-Verify because there's such a disconnect to some extent. I think those are the type of things that are a step in the right direction, because then you are really making sure that if somebody is getting a job that they're here legally. And those are the type of things that I would look at.
What is the disconnect on E-Verify? That seemed like a humane way to go. If there's not a job there for somebody to be in the first place, you're not rounding them up, handcuffing them, deporting them,
right,
putting in the expense.
Yeah, you had different groups that just didn't want to do that. I mean, you had a lot of social groups within the Democratic Party and others that didn't even want that. But you also had a lot of individuals within the ag community and others that felt as though it was too cumbersome. I know that there are companies that use a form of E-Verify that's probably even a better situation. And even the drawback on E-Verify is you can't do E-Verify until you've actually offered that individual a job and they've actually started the process, which, there was an example where somebody accepted a job, was going through the process because they can work while they're going through E-Verify, and then the person didn't pass, but then they were able to claim unemployment. So there's all these different situations and different scenarios. I think what we have to do is to try to find that balance as best as we can.
Let's talk about space a little bit. Space is our signature industry here on the Space Coast. Where do you think it stands in the landscape of other types of transportation or infrastructure or economic development efforts that the state is working on?
Well, again, I think we are well positioned with, the members of the Brevard delegation. We are all committed to the space program. And I had a chance to go out and tour the facility with Senator Thad Altman, who has really just been a leader when it comes to the space industry. And while there is a transition, it's potentially a very positive transition. It's forcing NASA and really the community to think outside the box. When you look at the hangars out there, allowing private companies to come in, public-private partnerships. When you go back and you look at the history of space exploration, that's really how it started, was saying, here's where we want to go, everybody compete, and you come up with the best product, and it sort of brings back that passion. It's not going to be easy, but the legislature will be there, and in my role as chairman of the committee that would oversee any funding, economic incentives, we're all in, and we're not going to change. So it may be difficult, but I look at it and say, there's some real bright spots here.
You're going to be Senate President at the same time that Steve Crisafulli, the representative from Merritt Island, is going to be Speaker of the House. What do you make of him?
I like him a lot. Steve and I have been friends for several years.
You're about the same age, aren't you?
I'm 43. I think he's still a young buck. I think he's 38 or 39. But very similar backgrounds, young families. I think we have very, very similar personalities, which is good. It's not a popularity contest. It's a job, and the job is, number one, you pass a balanced budget. You know, it's the only constitutional requirement you have. And it's important that you have a good partner across the hall, and I think Steve will be. And I want to help Steve be successful. I want him to enjoy that time, and if that happens, then I'll be very happy.
We just have about a minute left. Let me ask you a question that I always ask of candidates at political forums. What is your profession, and how does it shape your outlook on doing the job in Tallahassee?
Yeah, that's a great question. For 10 years, I ran a Chamber of Commerce, the Apopka Area Chamber of Commerce. And about 5 years ago, I switched over to healthcare and do external affairs, community relations for Orlando Health. And it's been an eye-opener for me because we deal in the world of healthcare so much, obviously, to see the impact of policy from the national level, the state level, and even the economy in general. You know, because not only are we there to help people get better, but there's elective surgeries and different things like that that people are not doing for various reasons out of fear they may lose their job if they take time off. That's been the learning experience, because now I'm actually really in a situation where I can see the impact of a lot of the decisions that are being made.
Andy Gardner, good luck in the legislative session ahead. It's been a pleasure to have you in.
Thank you for having me.
Remember, we welcome your comments on anything you see in this program or read in Florida Today. Just send an email to letters@floridatoday.com. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you right here next Wednesday on WBCC and FloridaToday.com.